everyone, and welcome back. In today's video, we are going to be talking about analyzing our audience. More specifically, we are going to address 1, what is audience analysis? 2, questions that we should ask ourselves when preparing for our presentations in regards to our audience. And then we are going to talk about the 8 steps to analyzing our audience. So let's go ahead and jump right into defining audience analysis. An audience analysis is the process of measuring information about your audience and being able to relate your topic to them according to the information that was collected from them. All right, so even before our class, for instance, I can go through and I can see how many students are in my class, and not making any type of generalizations based off of that information, but I know, hey, I have 30 students in this class. I have 40 students in this class. I have 100 students in this class. Do you think that it makes a difference in how an instructor teaches? Probably, right? It's a small class and we're meeting in person, for instance, and there's only 5 students. It's going to be very, very different how your instructor goes about conducting the lecture. And so the same can be said for public speaking. You want to be mindful of who is in your audience, how many individuals are in your audience. Essentially, in audience analysis, we are measuring information about who is present in our audience. Now that we've discussed what is an audience analysis, let's talk about questions that we should ask ourselves. Who is in your audience? This is the first question that you want to ask yourself. Who is sitting in your audience? And many of you would say students, right? What are their needs? So we are online and there are many needs that we need to be mindful of. So first, y'all need to be able to hear me. You need to be able to see me during the presentations. And remember, there's 4 presentations, so we need to see you, we need to be able to hear you, we need to be able to understand your message. And then for some presentations, it is a requirement that there is visual aid present. And so there may be different requirements for that specific presentation that you're giving. So you want to think about 1, who's in your audience first and foremost, 2, what are their needs, and then 3, who are they made up of so they can best relate this topic to their audience. So who is in your audience and how can you adjust it to fit those particular individuals? And I do this for many of my classes. I kind of go back and I look at the feedback. But for that 3rd question you want to ask yourself, it is again, who are they made up of so that you can best relate your topic to your audience? Because why even give a presentation that is not meaningful to the people who are sitting in it? With this class, for instance, I'm relaying this information to all of you so that you can do well on your presentations, you can get a good grade in the class. Yeah, there's that, but also application outside of just this class. So many of you want to learn, how can I give presentations outside, like for interviews, for my job? And I'm telling you, hey, this is how you can do it, what tends to work best. And so we want to think about who is sitting in our audience and what are their needs and how can I adjust this to fit their needs and their wants and their desires so that they're interested in it, because it's all about them. A lot of the time we think, okay, these presentations, I'm nervous, I'm scared, and that's okay. That's a normal feeling to have. But you also want to think about who is sitting in your audience and how am I going to get them to really listen to me and how can I relate it to them so that they actually want to listen. So there's that. Now when we're talking about an audience analysis, there's 8 steps associated with it. So first and foremost, you have A, which stands for analysis. So it's just who is sitting in your audience. That's essentially it. Who is sitting in your audience? And then you have you, understanding. What is their understanding of the material? What do they know? What do they not know? Do you need to provide definitions beforehand? Do you need to provide some sort of context before really jumping into it? For instance, I've had students talk about virtual reality, and so early on they'll define what they mean by virtual reality because, hey, maybe there's some students in the class who are not too familiar with that. And I remember at the time being like, okay, what like kind of virtual reality are you specifically referring to? So they specified for the class so that we can easily follow along throughout the presentation. Because again, if you don't do that early on, your audience, they're gonna be like, what the heck's going on, Cecilia? So that's something that you wanna define early on. So A, U, then we have D. And so D stands for demographics. So that would be age, gender, sexual orientation, religious background, political affiliation. So these are demographics. And sometimes when you take surveys online, when you're applying for maybe universities, when you're applying for a job, maybe they will ask you questions about your demographics. And this specifically, knowing individuals' demographics, their background, their upbringing, their worldview, it's very important because you don't want to come across as egocentric. Remember, we talked about egocentric in the previous chapters, and it's the tendency to be concerned with your own values, your own beliefs, and your own well-being. And you don't want to stereotype, you want to be mindful of your attitude as well. You really don't want to offend the individuals who are in your audience. And not only that, but it gives you an understanding, like for instance, socioeconomic status. Let's think about YouTubers. There are many YouTubers who kind of didn't have very much, and they say that while they're making their YouTube videos. They're like, I'm kind of scraping by with these YouTube videos, and then out of nowhere they have this amazing success. So for instance, if they're like, oh, it's so hard having a yacht, you're sitting there like, or at least I'm sitting there, I don't know about all of you, but I'm sitting there like, I don't own a yacht. So I'm disconnected from their content because we come from different backgrounds. See how like just that in itself, our socioeconomic status, if you're relaying information to a group of people and it doesn't sit well with them because, oh, we are not similar, you're very different than myself, they're not going to maybe relate to the material. And it could also offend them as well. So for me, I was sitting there like, oh yeah, it must be nice to have a yacht. I don't have a yacht. But again, you want to think about who's sitting in your audience, their demographic background, how the individual sitting in your class or in your group might make a difference in how you relay the information and how you communicate to them as well. Following that, we have I, which is interest. So what interests your audience? What are they into? And that's why we do the votes for this class, for your informative and persuasive speech, because you want to choose something that they're interested in. And like we were talking about previously when we were talking about the questions involved with conducting an audience analysis, why choose this topic if it's not something that they're not interested in, if it's not something that necessarily affects them? So you want to choose something that interests them. You want to relate it to them in some sort of meaningful way so that they're able to apply it either to their life or it's going to help them in their future understanding about a certain concept. And so that's what I try to do with this public speaking class. Many of you are going to go to job interviews. Many of you are going to have to do interviews now online. Many of you have to communicate regardless outside of this class. And so many of the topics at hand, they're going to help you not only within this class, but outside. But again, you want to think about who's sitting in the audience, what are their interests, and how can I be flexible and how can I make this specifically for them so that they're interested in what I'm talking about. So then we have E, environment. So you're going to want to think about where are you giving these presentations, and these are digital, these are online. But where are you doing them? You have to be mindful of your setup. That's something we talk about again when we go over delivery, but where are you? How many people are watching this? What type of environment am I giving this type of presentation? So Zoom would be an environment, right? It's a completely different type of environment in comparison to a face-to-face classroom. And so you want to think about what is the environment and how can I tailor my message to them in a meaningful way so that they can understand the material, the environment, how many people are there, how large the space is. The internet is a very, 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 very large space. And so the information that we relay online, somebody can copy and paste this video and show their friend and show another friend and show another friend. And so that's something, again, that we have to be mindful of when we are making videos and being mindful of what we're relaying to everyone. And then we're going to talk about their needs. And we talked about this already a little bit. So what are their needs? Some of us really do need the visual aids. Visual aids can enhance your overall presentation. Sometimes individuals need PowerPoints, or they prefer voiceovers with PowerPoints, right? And so what are your audience's needs? Of course, they need to hear you, they need to see you, they need to be able to listen and understand the information. Next, we have customization. And so how can you make it fun? How can you make it creative? Like for instance, if you're sitting in a face-to-face class, you might notice that your instructors have handouts. They use PowerPoints, they use personal narratives. So how can you customize your presentation to make it your own, but again, fit the needs of your audience so that they're able to understand the material. Make it fun, make it your own, as long as it's appropriate for a classroom environment, a virtual classroom environment. I don't mind it, have fun with it. And so again, how can you customize your presentation, make it unique, make it your own, because your personality is so different than my personality. My instruction style is so different than somebody else's instruction style. How can you go about customizing your presentations to make them your own, but also being considerate of your audience? And then finally, we have our final E, expectations. So what are the expectations of you? What are the expectations of your audience? I give expectations right at the very beginning of class, kind of what we're looking for, but also within every single prompt and every single evaluation form, you're going to see how you will be graded. So you want to look at those, of course, but something that is very, very important are the expectations of time. So we all have time expectations. So if your presentation is supposed to be from 3 to 5 minutes, it needs to be somewhere in between 3 to 5 minutes. So imagine in class, for instance, we have 20 presenters. And so, okay, you have 3 to 5 minutes, go up, give your presentation. Okay, wonderful, now we have the next one. Now we have the next one. We need to fit a certain amount within a certain time frame, all right? And so that's one reason why we typically do have time requirements, but also normally within any type of presentation, whether it's at work, whether it's at school, giving a speech during a wedding, usually there are some sort of time expectations. So standing up there talking about the bride and groom for 20 minutes might be a bit too long. You're probably not going to keep the audience involved when we have 20 more people who need to speak. And so the same thing goes for our presentations. There are time requirements that we do have. And so for the first presentation, 2 to 3 minutes. Go out, talk about yourself for 2 to 3 minutes. I'm a little bit more lenient with that first presentation just because I understand that many of you are kind of getting accustomed to this online space. But for this upcoming presentation, 3 to 5 minutes, that's it. So your video needs to be 3 to 5 minutes. Remember, I want you to watch everybody else's video. It helps you learn kind of what the do's and the don'ts are. Because while watching other people's presentations, you might be like, oh wow, they did that very well. Their attention getter was really spot on. Look at the way that they delivered the information, and that's going to help you. But it might also help in being critical of other people's presentations as well. Like, oh, their transitions weren't very clear, or my transition's clear, let me go back and look at those. So we do have certain expectations when it comes to time specifically, and of course there's also other expectations such as appropriateness for the type of classroom dynamic that we're in, and so on and so forth. So what are the expectations your audience have of you? And so one of the main ones would happen to be that time requirement. In today's video, we went over quite a bit. We first talked about what is audience analysis and kind of why we use audience analysis. 2, we talked about like questions that should be posed by you as the presenter beforehand. And then 3, we talked about the 8 steps, AUDIENCE, yes, 8 steps associated with audience analysis. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about this chapter, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Start thinking about, hey, who's in my audience? What type of topics should I select? What topics are going to relate to them? And I will see you all in our next video. Have a good day.